All right, here's everyone's favorite geometry topic, the law of sines and cosines. Now this is actually, believe it or not, merely an introduction of the idea. It's very brief and fast. You'll get more work on it if you get to trigonometry. It'll slow down, it'll be a little more in depth. But this is an overview and introduction. So here's how it works. There are some formulas that, specifically for triangles, no matter what kind of triangle it is, if you know certain information about that triangle, you can find all the other pieces. Now, if you remember way back in chapter 4, we had 4 things to prove that triangles were congruent. And that was angle, angle, side, angle, side, 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 and side, angle, side. If you could prove those 3 parts in those orders were congruent, 2 triangles were congruent. Well, that also means here that if you know 2 angles and a side of a triangle, then there's only one triangle that could ever be, and so it's possible to calculate what the other sides and the angles are in that triangle. And that's where these formulas come in. And so there are different strategies to take depending on what you know. So just to do an overview here, if you know 2 angles and then a side, or an angle, a side between and another angle, here in this case, in both of these cases, you know 2 angles. Well, so the first thing to do is to find the third angle, because that's pretty easy. All the angles in a triangle add up to 180. So we're going to do an example here. Remember that side A is opposite angle A, and side C is opposite angle C, and so forth. So I'm going to put some numbers in here, just some random numbers. And so if I had, say, 28 degrees here, and let's say 100 degrees there, and I said this was 10 units. Well, now what I know is angle, side in between, angle. So that fits in this category. So the first thing I do is find the third angle. Well, they have to add up to 180. So 28 plus 100 is 128. And I'm just going to do the quick math here. But that would leave 52 degrees? Yeah, 52 degrees left to make a 180 degree triangle. Okay, so that's the first thing to do, just to find the third angle. And then the next thing to do is to use the law of sines to find the measure of the sides. So in this case, I know 10, which is b. So I'm going to do 10 over the sine of b, because this is opposite here, so sine of 52 degrees is equal to something I don't know, let's say opposite c, over the sine of c. So I want you to recognize the pattern here. This is side A over sine A. Side over sine. Side B over sine B. But this is arbitrary, meaning these letters could be anything. This could be x over sine x. Or happy face over sine happy face, as long as that's what was labeled on the picture. They are arbitrary. So here I had b over sine of b. b over sine of b is equal to c, something I don't know, over the sine of c. c over the side c over the sine of c. That makes sense. And you're going to use your calculator to figure this out. Now, some of you might want to cross multiply, but in these cases, and the reason why this formula is written the way it is if you multiply both sides by the denominator here, sine of 100 degrees, that's going to cancel, right? And so you're going to be left with that. So now it's sine 100 times 10 divided by sine of 52 degrees. Go ahead and try that on your calculator. And in addition to doing that, also use this same formula to find this. And when the video comes back in a few seconds, those answers will be up there. So go ahead, pause the video, do your work. Okay, for all these problems, we're basically going to be using the same triangle, but working in different directions so that you can see some consistency in your answers and kind of know exactly what you should be getting. So in this case, I erased all those angles that we had before. I'm left with just the sides. So if I have all 3 sides, how I can find any angle is to use the law of cosines. Now the formula I have here for the law of cosines is not found in the book. It's actually derived from that formula. It's just taking that formula and solving for the measure of the angle. And so it looks super, super complicated, I know, but it's just a matter of plugging in numbers. It's just an advanced method of just plugging in numbers. So here's how it goes. So I want the measure of angle A, so that's this one right here. And so I'm going to use this formula. It says cosine inverse, okay, parentheses, b squared. So if this is A, there's b, so b squared is 10 squared, okay, plus c squared. C would be 12.5 squared, and then minus a squared. A is 6. All right, divided by 2 times b times c. So b was 10, c was 12.5. So let's do 2 times this first. So 2 times 12.5 is 25 times 10. So 2 times 10 times 12.5. If you do the math there, you'll get the cosine inverse of 2 times, that's 25, 250 on the bottom. And then what we have here, up here, you're going to have to use your calculator to figure that one out. I will give you a moment. I want you to use your calculator, figure out what that number is, put it in, and then use your calculator to figure out what the angle is. Pause now, do that yourself. All right. So if you were to simplify the top here, you would have gotten 220.25. Then on your calculator, you would have divided these two numbers and then taken the cosine inverse. That's the last thing you do. At the very end, after you figure out what this exact number is as a decimal, and it will always be a decimal. If it's a cosine inverse, it's going to be between, well, in this course, between -1 and 1. Actually, it will always be between -1 and 1. But in this course, oftentimes it will probably be between 0 and 1. But it's going to be a small number. If you get like 5 in there, you did something wrong. It's going to be a decimal. The biggest it'll be is 1 or -1. And you're going to take the cosine inverse. And on your calculator, that's what you're going to do. And what I came out with was 28.2. Now, a quick warning here. Sometimes there's a temptation when you get 220.25 to just be like, oh, that's just 220. Plug that in, 220, divide by 250, and do that. I'm just going to warn you, don't round until the end. Because if you round while you're processing the formulas, you're going to introduce an error every time you round, and eventually your last rounding might not be correct. So only round when you get to the very end. Until then, you want to be as precise as possible. And that way, when you round at the end, your answer is accurate. So this means that this angle here is 28.2 degrees. And you'll remember that when we did it before, I had given you that angle as 28 degrees. And so the reason why it's 28.2 is because, again, these numbers we decided to just round and leave fixed and then work the other way. So once again, it's close, but if you round too early and not at the end, you're going to get these errors, these things that are slightly imprecise. So anyway, how you would find angle B and angle C, either one by the law of cosines. I'm not going to work it all the way out, but I want you to see how the formula works, because it's arbitrary, meaning you don't have to only do angle A. So I'll show you how this works. Oops, can't erase that 12.5. So say I wanted to find the measure of angle B. So I'm going to put measure of angle B is equal to, and this is what I'm going to do. Everywhere that I see A, I am now putting B, and everywhere I see B, I am now putting A. They're switching places. So instead of A, I have B. And instead of B, I have A both ways. Okay, so here we go. So cosine, oops, when I got ahead of myself, cosine inverse. Okay, so everywhere I see B, I put A. So A here would be 6, so 6 squared, plus C squared, C is 12.5, plus 12.5 squared, minus, instead of A, I put B. So minus B squared, B is 10, so 10 squared, over 2 times, instead of B, I put A, so 6 times C is 12.5. So once again, if I want to find B instead of A, well then they switch places in the formula. That's how it works. So you only need one formula, and if you're finding a different letter, you just switch the letters around, and that's it. This would be solved the same way. I'm going to have you pause the video and figure out the last two angles, and when the video comes back, those answers will be in here. So go ahead and pause it now and solve it for yourself. Now hopefully by now you're seeing that this is a long process, but it is just kind of plugging in numbers, solving these things, plugging certain things in your calculator and solving. It's a long process, but it's not impossible. Now finally, if you have side, angle, side, a side, an angle between, and another side, you're going to use the law of cosines and the law of sines. You use the law of cosines to find that third side, and then you're going to use the law of sines, and you'll notice I did something a little odd here. I switched it around, so instead of side over sine, I did sine over side, which is totally okay to flip both sides of those equations around. It'll still work. That's just a little bit faster way of solving, so you don't have to do cross multiplication. But if you use that version, it will work all fine. Okay, so I'm going to do this very, very fast, and if you need to pause the video, slow it down, that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and use this to find the third side. So I need to find side C. I don't know that side. So here the formula says A, but again, if instead I want to put C in there, that just means that the A's and the C's, they switch. So this becomes B squared. Oh, that C becomes an A squared minus 2B. Oh, that becomes an A times, this is a times, just so you know, the cosine, that was an A, now it's going to become C. Okay, so I'm going to put it up here. C squared, I don't know that, is equal to B squared. B is 10, so 10 squared, plus A squared. A squared is 6, plus 6 squared, minus 2BA. So 2 times B is 20, times A is 120. Cosine times the cosine of C, angle C, 110 degrees. Okay? So I would plug that in my calculator, and then to find C, I got to take the square root. So go ahead and pause that and find out what side C is. And then you can also go and use, while you're having it paused, go and use the law of sines to find the angle measures that you would get in this problem for the last two angles. And once we come back, those answers will be there. So if this is what you got, congratulations. This is definitely one of the hardest topics in geometry. Also, I did a little trick on you. If you didn't notice, that used to be 100 degrees in the other examples, and I changed it to 110 just to see if you were paying attention. And so there you go. That's why the numbers are different. And if you rounded correctly and only rounded at the end, this is what you should have got. All right, good job.